You're listening to The Extra Real with Ger Brown
and Colm Ryan for a look at the bigger picture of film.
with films from around the world,
Through the decades,
from movies you know and love.
to movies you need to discover.
This week on the show we're talking about Céline Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. There's a lot to talk about. Let's get stuck into it with the plot synopsis.
Yeah, so basically this film is set in 18th century France, and it's about a female painter, Marianne, who's hired to paint a wedding portrait of a young woman, Eloise. And it's set kind of in this island off the coast of Brittany. And Eloise has been married to this guy in Milan, but back in those days, obviously without phones and social media, to judge if the woman was beautiful enough, I guess, the man would have to see a portrait of her painting in those very misogynistic times.
So she's got her job and she's got to do it kind of incognito. She doesn't tell her that she's there to paint. And from that, we get a passionate love affair. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, because the character of Eloise is basically this is the second painter they're on, because the first painter,
Yeah.
she didn't want to be like, she didn't want the portrait done in the first place. She doesn't want to get married, so that's why the character of Marianne has to kind of do it in secret and go on these kind of walks with her and see if she can, like, you know, figure it all out. But it's obviously very hard to do a portrait of someone if you're just watching them in motion the whole time.
This is Sciamma's fourth feature. And, having watched the other ones, Water Lilies came out around 2007, also starring Adele Haenel, who's Eloise in this, and Tomboy, which I thought was absolutely amazing. Really, really brilliant. And then just prior to this one was Girlhood, which I thought was a solid film. I also felt it was a film that wasn't made for me, so it was a real surprise and a delight that this film turned out to be so good. Well, it was not a surprise, but it was great just to see a film that turned out to be what I think. I think this film's an absolute stonking classic, but we'll talk more about that in a second.
Yeah, of course.
The rest of the cast. So the cast-wise, this is class. I mean, like Adele Haenel, who I think is really one of the actors of the current generation of French cinema, has just been knocking it out of the park with films like 120 Beats Per Minute, Les Combattants, and she was also in One Nation, One King. She's been thereabouts, and super primed to go international anytime soon. And then you've got Naomi Marlon as Marianne, and she's terrific in this film. I hadn't seen her in anything else before this, but she's been knocking around as well in the French film scene. And there are two protagonists.
Yeah.
And what we've essentially got here is, this is a lesbian love affair in the 18th century, pre-revolutionary France. And as a piece of cinema, how would you describe this?
Wow.
It's too broad a question.
It is too broad a question, but you saw this at the Cork Film Festival.
Yeah.
I watched this a few days ago on my TV, and I'm really envious of the fact that you got to see it in the cinema, because it's an unbelievably cinematic film.
It's an eyegasm.
Yeah, it very much is an eyegasm. It's shot in 8K instead of 35mm. Sciamma and the DP Claire Martin wanted to kind of make the colours pop, and they didn't want to go for that kind of, I guess, timeless look that you get in a lot of period films. They wanted it to kind of have a contemporary look, and the colours are so vibrant and bright. But there's great use of kind of like following shots in it. Audio kind of is amazing. The editing, the cuts and everything are outstanding. It's really like a film where everyone is kind of on top of their game.
Yeah, this is pure cinema. Like, they take the basic elements, and as you say, the editing is just incredible. This wonderful ellipses, like as I think we were talking about earlier on. That sequence at the start when her her stuff falls out of the boat, and she jumps off to pick it up.
Yeah.
Jumps off the boat to pick it up, and there's an ellipsis midway through it, which cuts out the labouring of swimming through the water and retrieving it. I mean, we could have seen that, but no, Sciamma just cuts straight to she's back in the boat, she's going ahead. And it just reminded me of that Sydney, I think it's Sydney Lumet said that, when you see somebody labouring with something, that's boring to watch. Well, I wonder how Herzog would have felt about that.
Or Tarkovsky.
Or Tarkovsky, or any of the other things. But anyway, there's that sort of stuff. And of course, there's some wonderful linking shots and scene transitions throughout. So yes, we're bathing in pure cinema here. So this is top quality stuff.
It's very interesting as well, reading interviews with Sciamma, and also, I guess, watching it yourself and seeing references to other films.
Yeah.
I guess when I noticed early on was kind of Persona by Bergman, because in this film you have two actresses who are the same age and they're kind of the same height, and I think that was Sciamma, that was kind of deliberate. And also, interestingly, Titanic, apparently while they were making this film, Sciamma was watching Titanic because she said it was like, it was about a love story that was a present love story, but also the memory of a love story. And she also found DiCaprio quite kind of androgynous in that time, and
that's brilliant.
Yeah, it is amazing. And also that, like, DiCaprio and Winslet were kind of, I wouldn't say DiCaprio was a nobody. He'd definitely done things before, but they weren't, the stars that they became. And Naomi Merlon, like definitely Adele Haenel has been a rising star for a while, but Naomi Merlon, I hadn't seen her in anything before this.
When we're talking about the rest of the cinematic tradition that she's trading off, you've got things like Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And, I'm thinking specifically of things like Vertigo. At times it feels like a kind of a gothic horror film, like something like The Innocents or something like that, especially some of the just even some of the initial shots when she's walking around the house, and of course the ghostly apparition thing is really, really interesting. And also there have been other allusions as well. It's the scene where they're in the dunes and they're amongst the grass and they all rise up in unison, and apparently that type of shot is called a Miyazaki, and it was influenced by My Neighbor Totoro. So I think she's really run the gamut with this. And then so that was, that for me was a scene that really stood out for me before I knew it was called a Miyazaki, but there you go.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say about like the horror elements, because in that scene where the kind of bonfire scene, I guess, which is probably one of the most famous
scene of the film, really.
The scene of the film, really, where the two women are looking at each other across a bonfire, and Eloise's dress catches fire for a moment, and also but there are these other ladies around at the time, and they're kind of, I guess, more townsfolk, and the way they start singing this amazing song, but the way it starts, it almost sounds like music from a horror film, and you're expecting something else to happen, but what actually does happen is probably even more surprising and even more beautiful as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Fugiere non possum.
That's it. Yeah.
So that they can't escape, I think, is the general gist of it. And yeah, it's this thrilling, throbbing piece of music, and yeah, the connection between fire and the two characters is kind of is carried throughout the film. There's an earlier scene at a harpsichord where I think she's playing some Vivaldi.
Yep. Which
again feeds into the end of the film, and there's a fire behind them, and in this instance, I suppose the power of the fire, the influence of the fire, or whatever, is on Marianne's character. In the big bonfire sequence, it's on Eloise, and so that's really, really interesting. What I think is also really interesting in this film is the portrayal of men.
Yeah, they're not really there.
Or how they act. They're not really there. And I have to say, it's refreshing. It almost feels like, from my perspective anyway, it feels like we're getting a window into the world of women. And so that's a bit different. And I think there's a great scene towards the end with one of the few men in it, where we're looking at one of Marianne's portraits, and it's like a portrait convention or exhibition, and there's a guy and he's mansplaining to her, and I thought that was interesting.
And
And of course,
also,
the
it's yeah,
portrait, yeah, you're gonna say it. Go on,
yeah,
say
no,
it.
it's obviously the story of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yeah, you're just yeah.
Eurydice, sorry, I didn't do classics like yourself.
That scene is in the background, and of course he's explaining that it's usually shown in a different way, but of course we know that from the picture and from an earlier scene that it's really depicting stuff that we've seen. So an interesting take on the classical tradition. What other scenes stood out for you?
Well, obviously, when you're introduced to Eloise, there's this amazing scene where uh, Marianne doesn't really see her face or anything like that. She's just introduced in a hood, and they're going to go for their walk together, the first walk, and straight away Eloise tears off towards the cliff, and we learn earlier in the film that her older sister had committed suicide by jumping off a cliff on the island. So straight away, Marianne is kind of freaked out by this, and she runs after her, and then suddenly, Eloise turns around and just says to her, "Oh, I just wanted to run. I hadn't run in years." And maybe it's just that kind of lifestyle of always being kind of cooped away in a small island has just gotten to her, and like she probably represses a lot of the passion she has.
Yeah, I think one of the big things in the film is this lack of freedom or this desire for freedom by all characters, you know,
Yep.
whether it's the Countess or the Eloise or Sophie, the servant girl, or Marianne. When we're talking about the Countess, we need to mention it's Valeria Golino.
Famous
We
for
all
hot
know
shots.
famous for Hot Shots. And loads of other films. I mean, and
No,
she's
of
kind
course.
of, she's graduated into directing now herself, and yeah, she's still a cracker.
Oh, she's so beautiful.
There's no two ways about it.
She's amazing. And those scenes between her and Marianne are really kind of fun and interesting. And I like the kind of sorority that is there between Marianne, Eloise, and Sophie, the maid. And obviously, one of the more, I guess, the more interesting, the more like tougher scenes in the film is where Marianne and Eloise help Sophie um, go for an abortion because she becomes pregnant and she's too young and she can't, have a kid, I guess, with her lifestyle. And that's quite an interesting scene because they go and Marianne cannot look, but Eloise tells her to forces her to look and goes, "Look, this is life. You have to look at this. You can't just look at the pretty things in life." And then they paint a recreation of that scene afterwards,
Yeah.
which is, you wouldn't get many filmmakers doing that, to be honest.
No, actually, in the abortion scene, I'm not too sure. It's not very clear. Either the abortionist or the person helping the abortionist is the casting director.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
Crystal Barra,
you've got the small,
and of course
the
the
small
baby.
kid, yeah, the
Yeah,
baby holding the hand of Sophie while it's happening.
and I think that's something that freaked out the director. I think she was saying, you never know what to expect. There's not a whole pile you can do, and you try to make the child as comfortable as possible, which puts you in I suppose the least amount of comfort. And I think initially what had been written was that the child puts its hand on Sophie's chest, but I think what actually happens is that, well, I don't think we see it. The child wipes her tears away, which I think is just super powerful.
Very powerful.
Yeah. And of course, we've got a female DP, so Claire Maton. So again, we have an awful lot of this female gaze stuff, and then, unusually, it's not a male DP, and I suppose it has to help. I've certainly felt that this was a less lecherous viewpoint than what it could have been. I mean, this is the type of stuff that could be 70s erotica,
No, of
I'm always
course,
bringing
yeah.
it down to its baseline, but there you go. It could have been that. It doesn't feel that.
No.
And I think what you get is a strong connection between the two characters, and that's built with the framing, which is quite sensitive, and it's impressive.
Very impressive, and it's the kind of thing as well. Like we talked about, kind of the freedom of the characters and stuff like that, and it's very interesting to see kind of like female painters. We don't actually really see many films about female painters. Like there's films on Picasso, there's films on Turner, but not really female painters too much, especially in this time period. And it's kind of interesting how much, I suppose, freedom the character of Marianne has. That she's the daughter of a painter, but she's not forced to marry like Eloise is, and she can smoke a pipe, which you don't really see female characters doing. She kind of has these pockets in her dress, and all these kind of interesting things that you just do not see.
Structurally, we've got a strange setup. We've got a prologue before we launch into the main film, and then we've got a triple ending, which ties an awful lot of elements back together again. One of the things that I thought was really impressive was it brings back the Orpheus and Eurydice thing. We've also got a thing with a certain self-portrait that's made, which is on a certain page number, which is 28.
Yeah.
And that piece really gives us, I think, consolation that I'm not going to say it. There's a consolation in it, and there's resolution with that. But then that's followed by an equally impressive ending, which ties together the harpsichord stuff from earlier on.
Yeah.
And it's super powerful, and it's got a really nice, slow, long take on Adele Haenel's character, and she goes through a whole range of emotions. And it's thrilling stuff.
No, it very much is. And yeah, it's kind of an amazing film because there's no real, like, the music is all diegetic, right? It's all in the scenes.
Yeah.
There's no score at all. And you're working off, Sciamma said, I think, she wanted to have, like, natural rhythm for characters.
Yeah.
So that's you're working off that kind of sound, and then you're obviously working off, you have this bit where the broken harpsichord is playing the song, and then the fact that it comes back at the end is really kind of beautiful. It's really, it's a very structurally interesting film, that it does kind of come full circle. Really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so Céline Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I think it's worthy of a watch simply because it's got some of the most exciting actors of the current generation of French film. It's Miyazaki, it's Hitchcock, it's Bergman. It's all of those things rolled into 120-minute feature.
Sciamma's definitely one of those kind of filmmakers who's just like, each film, I suppose, there's something interesting going on, and that she gets, I guess, something like such a canvas to paint on for this film means that, like, pardon the pun, exactly, I just can't wait her next film to come out, and they've usually had like 4 or 5 years in between it, in between each film, so hopefully we don't have to wait that long for the next one.
Thank you very much for listening. You can contact the show by emailing to extrareal@gmail.com. Search for the Extra Real Podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can listen to the show on Spotify, iTunes or anywhere you get your podcast from.